NAFTA, by Canada and Mexico. President Donald Trump has vowed he'll pull out of the North American Free Trade Agreement if he doesn't get the changes he wants. So Canada and Mexico have found a workaround: reach out directly to U.S. governors, local lawmakers and industry leaders in a bid to save NAFTA. Canadian cabinet and parliament officials have held more than 170 meetings with senior U.S. officials in 23 states between Inauguration Day and the end of last month. They're focusing on big cities, coastal states, and Rust Belt towns throughout Michigan, Ohio and Pennsylvania with economies that rely on cross-border trade. And in Mexico, an extensive private sector effort has been underway pairing up major U.S. industry groups such as the Chamber of Commerce and the National Association of Manufacturers with their Mexican counterparts to ensure that organizations in both countries are on the same page. The goal is to box in the U.S. president with pressure from governors, mayors and business leaders to show how valuable NAFTA has been, state by state, district by district. The hope is that they can build groundswell of local support in the United States to pressure the Trump administration not to do anything radical to the 23-year-old trade agreement. The Office of the U.S. Trade Representative plans to reveal the Trump administration's NAFTA negotiating targets on Monday. With talks expected to begin 30 days after that, the preemptive efforts to line up American allies and spokespeople will aid in any defense against potential new barriers that the U.S. proposes. Canada has done a good job on the charm offensive, while Mexico has been involved in its own active engagement strategy, said international trade lawyer Dan Ujdzo, who focuses on U.S. Canada bilateral relations. If all politics is local, all trade is personal, he added. Trade observers and experts on both sides of the border described an elaborate, targeted engagement effort that has involved sending various government officials and corporate executives to key congressional districts to highlight how many jobs NAFTA has created in the district, or what percentage of exports were sent to either Canada or Mexico. By collecting that data and making it readily available to governors and other regional or local representatives, Canada and Mexico are hoping to illustrate the various effects of any potential changes to NAFTA. For instance, they will be able to use the information to pinpoint which U.S. states or companies would be hit the hardest by, say, heightened tariffs or tighter rules of origin. Their working premise is that members of Congress are going to have strong opinions about NAFTA, said Scotty Greenwood, a senior advisor for the Canadian American Business Council. So the Government of Canada wants to make sure that, as members are forming their opinions, they have an appreciation for how integrated their economy is with Canada. The effort continued into the National Governors Association's annual summer meeting in Providence, RI, this week, where Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau gave an impassioned keynote address on Friday, emphasizing the need to preserve a trade deal and a bilateral trade and investment relationship that supports millions of North American jobs. The relationship between our countries is historic. It is a model to the world, Trudeau told the governors. It is of critical importance for people on both sides of the border that we maintain and indeed improve it. We must get this right, he added. Canadian Foreign Minister Chrystia Freeland also attended the event, during which Trudeau sat down to talk trade one-on-one with a series of governors over the course of a single afternoon, including Iowa's Governor Kim Reynolds, a Republican, and Colorado's Governor John Hickenlooper, a Democrat. Across the hall, state and provincial level groups from both Canada and Mexico gathered with their U.S. counterparts to present a trilateral, united front ahead of the start of the talks. The joint appearance is aimed in part to present a united front, that they want to preserve a robust trade relationship regardless of conflicting messages coming out of the White House. The Rhode Island visit, plus ongoing state-level outreach from Ottawa, comes on top of continued discussions between the Prime Minister's office and the White House. Trudeau and Vice President Mike Pence sat for a bilateral meeting in Providence on Friday, which the Canadian leader described as a great discussion about our shared interests. One of the things that I've highlighted from the very beginning is that we understand that engaging in multiple layers and on multiple levels with the various elements of American government and the economy is extremely important, he added. The all-out charm offensive has been many months in the making. Trudeau has created war room inside the Prime Minister's office dedicated to bilateral issues. At the helm of that office is Brian Clough, who previously worked as Chief of Staff to Freeland when she served as Canada's Trade Minister. They're kind of adapting their staffing structure to be nimble enough to deal with a big NAFTA conversation, Greenwood said. Various Canadian premiers have also made visits to Washington, or, if they can't come themselves, have hired K-Street-type people to mind their interests and keep a close eye on the United States' evolving position on NAFTA, Ujzo said. Everybody's trying to read the tea leaves of the administration, he added. The other challenge for Canada and Mexico has been preparing their own set of offensive interests for renegotiation, which they have not revealed themselves. Moises Galak, a Mexico City-based businessman who leads private sector engagement with Mexico's government on trade issues, said his team had prepared by mapping out all potential objectives the U.S. might pursue by dividing policy areas into three buckets. Those include areas currently covered under NAFTA, those that had been negotiated in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and those that administration officials have mentioned in passing but which do not fall into either category, such as ways to reduce the trade deficit. A team of analysts has then analyzed each bucket and prepared data and negotiating points to help them respond to potential U.S. proposals. With this matrix, basically you have most issues covered, Kalak said, estimating that at least 90% of whatever the U.S. might lay out in its negotiating objectives has already been analyzed by his team. Maybe some issues are not as in-depth as I think they're going to be, but we're ready for the negotiations. The preparation on both sides of the border comes as the embattled U.S. administration continues to navigate internal differences of opinion to sort out its own objectives. A document outlining the U.S.'s negotiating positions expected on Monday, mandated under trade legislation to be released at least 30 days before talks can begin, should give the most detailed indication yet of what the administration wants to see in NAFTA 2.0. But there has so far been disagreement over how narrow Trump might want the objectives to be. People in the administration are very nervous about the notion that he'll want them to put on the table U.S. negotiating objectives that are going to be impossible for Canada and Mexico to agree to, one Washington Trade Association source told Politico. There are going to be certain favorite ideas that the Peter Navarros and Steve Bannons of the world have that they want to use NAFTA for. And it's everything from going after value-added tax to what's an acceptable trade deficit, the source said, referring to two of Trump's more nationalistic advisors on trade. But those would be completely and totally non-starters. Governors steer clear of Trump. Vice President Mike Pence spent much of his afternoon address to the nation's governors on Friday making sure they know how much Donald Trump loves them. But a majority of the state leaders gathered here this week spend much of their three-day summer meeting pretending the president doesn't exist. When a group of 7 Democratic governors stood in front of a cramped hotel meeting room Friday morning to decry the GOP's health care plan, for all 30 minutes they avoided saying the polarizing words Donald Trump. Just hours later, the independent governor of Alaska spent the better part of a conversation over a cup of coffee extolling the virtues of administration officials from Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke to EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt without ever mentioning the president by name. And in the halls of the Rhode Island Convention Center and surrounding hotels, Republican, Democratic, and independent governors alike flitted from meetings with their U.S. colleagues to sit-downs with their counterparts from Canada, Mexico and other foreign countries, aiming to patch up international relationships that Trump himself has threatened. At the tail end of the National Governors Association's 3-day summer meeting, the lengths to which the country's state executives went to sidestep the issue of the disruptive president underscored just how much the current Oval Office occupant has rewired the political environment, confounded its participants and upended their usual way of doing business. For many of them, the safest play is to avoid the matter altogether. When I deal with all these governors here, Democrat or Republican, I'm not sure his name has even come up, said Virginia Democratic Governor Terry McAuliffe, the NGA chairman, who is mentioned as a prospective Trump challenger in 2020. You would think it would be a big topic of discussion. It's almost like he's a non-factor, no one's even talking about him. Neither the White House's most prominent allies nor its loudest detractors in governors' mansions made it to Rhode Island to begin with, significantly dampening what could have been a charged atmosphere. New Jersey's Chris Christie and Florida's Rick Scott, both close Republican Trump associates, skipped the meeting, as did frequent Trump critics like fellow Republican John Kasich of Ohio and Democrats Andrew Cuomo of New York, Jerry Brown of California, and Jay Inslee of Washington. Instead, Trump's uneven relationship with other governors was in the spotlight. Few of the GOP governors supported him early in his 2016 campaign, but with 27 of the 38 governors' mansions up for grabs in 2018 held by Republicans, Trump casts a large shadow over the midterm election map. Some red state governors have rushed toward him with open arms, while GOP state executives in Democrat-heavy states, like Illinois' Bruce Rauner, Massachusetts' Charlie Baker, and Maryland's Larry Hogan, have strained to avoid mentioning him altogether. At the summer meeting, Republican governors from states that have expanded Medicaid sought to avoid committing themselves to either side of the pitched health care debate on Capitol Hill, while the Democrats in attendance urged bipartisanship, resisting the urge to knock the White House that's been pushing the measure. There is a sense, with most of the things we deal with on a day-to-day basis, we can deal with them now in the states, said Tennessee Republican Governor Bill Haslam, insisting that the governor's common refrain about their political independence is still true. Without waiting around for an answer out of Washington. Indeed, on policy after policy, governors whistled past the White House. When it came to trade, they aligned themselves with counterparts from Canada and Mexico, many of whom traveled to Rhode Island for that specific purpose, in a bid to get distance from the White House and present an otherwise united North American front just 1 month before NAFTA's renegotiation begins. As Trump continues entertaining protectionist ideas like removing the country from NAFTA altogether or slapping tariffs and other import restrictions on trading partners, many governors have directly reached out to foreign capitals to create working trade relationships. That strategic circumventing of the West Wing is reassuring to our allies, said Arkansas Republican Governor Russell Hutchinson, pointing to $2 billion worth of Chinese investments in his state as an example of what's at stake. This is a big deal for us. The very presence of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau at the event, the first ever visit of a foreign leader to the NGA meeting, thrust into the spotlight Canada's efforts to move beyond Trump's rhetoric about reshaping the country's trade regime, aiming to work at the state level to encourage bilateral trade and protect NAFTA. Asked whether such an effort was sensible given the anti-free trade sentiment emanating from Trump's White House, Nevada Republican Governor Brian Sandoval didn't hesitate. Of course it makes sense. It's a great opportunity, he said, and it's an opportunity that we have just barely time. 45 After Dark Not Done Yet edition. Turns out Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting wasn't just with a Russian attorney. It also included a Russian-American lobbyist who U.S. officials consider a Russian intelligence operative. U.S. officials are examining what role Rinat Akhmetshin played in the now infamous meeting he attended with Trump Jr., Jared Kushner and Paul Manafort, Politico's Ollie Watkins reports. A former Soviet counterintelligence official, Akhmetshin told the Associated Press on Friday that he had attended the Trump Tower meeting that was arranged by Trump Jr. Akhmetshin's acknowledgement added a fresh layer to a story that has bedeviled the White House all week, damaging their claims of transparency and forcing key staff, like Kushner, to focus on Russia. For his part, the president's son-in-law changed his legal team on Friday afternoon, with Jamie Gorelick stepping back and Abay Lowell taking charge of the inquiry. Gorelick will still represent Kushner on other matters but said the shakeup came at his instance. Kushner has shuffled his legal team at a time of high tension and increasing scrutiny over his participation in the meeting. Elsewhere in President Trump's orbit, big hitter, the White House is adding Washington lawyer Ty Cobb, a relative of the legendary Detroit Tigers ballplayer, to its legal team to handle legal and media responses to Russia probes. Bloomberg, lots to parse. President Trump's campaign digital director, Brad Parscale, will voluntarily meet later this month with the House Intelligence Committee, one of the bodies investigating Russia's role in the 2016 election. Lean Machine: President Trump badly trails both President Obama and President Bush when it comes to political appointees, leaving a slew of key posts unfilled. Bone to pick: after a Hawaii judge expanded the definition of what qualified as a bona fide relationship for those affected by President Trump's travel ban, Attorney General Jeff Sessions promised to appeal the ruling. Let's begin. Republican leaders are pushing to at least begin debate on stalled healthcare legislation and aren't yet focused on getting the votes needed for passage. There you have it. You're caught up on the Trump administration. Happy Friday. Winter is